Hey, so movies. We all watch them, and if you don't, I think you're weird. I've had a deep love for movies my whole life. I started out watching them, then I started making them with my sister, then I started making YouTube videos, so clearly movies have been a big part of my life, but over the past 5 or so years, that love has grown to a whole new level. As a kid, I'd take my DVDs of Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and just play them over and over and over again, but today there's so many different ways you can stream movies. Screw a DVD, I can open up my phone at any time, download the Netflix app, and watch it right here. Or here. Or here! I don't even know. But today my preferred movie watching method will always be the theater, but a lot of people don't share the same sentiment as me, and why would they? Streaming services these days are incredible and have so much content, so it's no wonder they've taken off as much as they have. They're more convenient. But what I'm going to be talking to you today isn't just an opinion piece. This is a letter. To you. This is why you need to go to the movie theaters. Now, listen, I get it. Why would you ever give up the comfort of your own home just to waste some gas money? Well, I'll tell you why. The experience. Look at the equipment these artists are using. Look at the editing timelines. Look at the massive crew. These movies are designed for the best possible viewing experience you can get your hands on. Sure, home theaters have gotten to a great point in recent years, but nowhere else can you experience it the same way as a true theater. The booming sound, the projected screen, the reclining seats. This is all stuff you just can't replicate anywhere else. Whether you're watching a bad movie, a good movie, or anything in between, it should be an experience. You're willingly giving over your precious time to these films, so it shouldn't be something you forget about within the next week. If you watch movie after movie from your home, they all get jumbled together and you have nothing to tie any one down to a specific moment. But I can remember theater experiences. I can remember seeing Psycho for the first time with my dad on the main screen at the Somerville Theater. I can remember the wooden seats we were in, the slightly sticky floor under my feet, how the film reel being projected wasn't perfect the whole way through, the way the whole theater laughed at certain moments. You just don't get something like that from your home. And I understand that for certain movies you have no other choice but to watch them from your home, which is fine, but in recent years, tons of theaters have been doing special limited day screenings for older movies, ranging from something like Grease or The Big Lebowski to 2001: A Space Odyssey or It's a Wonderful Life. So why would you ever choose not to see those in a theater? The directors of these movies do truly insane things to create these films, and instead of watching them on the best possible screen you can see them on, you choose to watch them on your small home TV. This feels like such a disservice to not only the directors who make these specifically for the big screen, but also everyone else that's involved in the making of the film. But I'm aware that there's one major factor that turns people away from the movie theater: the price. The average price for one ticket these days is around $10, and that number goes up if you're seeing it with friends or family, or seeing it in a different format like IMAX, 3D, or Dolby, and that's not even mentioning the cost of gas to get to the theater, as well as any snacks you choose to get there. It seems like the minimum cost to just see a movie and get a small popcorn today is somewhere around $20, which is really steep for most, especially young people. But also the average price for movies that have just left the theater and are available to rent on something like Amazon Prime is also around the $20 range. So is it really that crazy to decide to go to the theater rather than waiting 3 months to see it from home? Recently, news broke that AMC, the largest theater chain in the US, will begin to roll out a sort of seating chart, charging more for the best seats that are in the center and less for the worst seats, the ones in the very front. So again, to most, this is another reason to avoid the theaters. But let's also not forget that there's tons of local theaters and other chains like Showcase, so despite the fact that AMC is now trying to treat the theater like a concert, there's tons of other options at your disposal. Up until now, I've only been giving my opinion on this issue, but I'm not alone in this sentiment. John Fithian, the president and CEO of the National Association of Theater Owners, talks about how the theater industry is today, saying,
"The attitude in the hallways, the conversations with the members who operate motion picture theaters around the country and around the world then versus now is dramatically different."
And he's right. Even as far back as the early 1900s, theaters began to struggle as television became more prevalent. Theaters still remained a big deal, but they never regained the stride that they once had in the 30s and 40s. And sure, there's the big hit blockbuster movies that keep coming out, but they both help and hurt theaters.
People say, oh, the movies are back. And for a certain type of movie, yes, the movies are back. We have the big hits. Marvel movies still doing well. Kids movies has shown that you can bring a family audience back, but the dramas, the middle-of-the-road action movies that are not the A-list franchise tentpoles, those have really struggled.
The Marvel movies and legacy sequels are the main things driving people to the theater right now, which is great, but it also pushes the smaller, more indie films down. So it's great when something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which had a tenth of the budget of a Marvel movie, not only gets the financial recognition it got, but also the critical praise, with it sweeping countless categories at every awards show. But even with seeing the success of something like this, studios are still apprehensive to take that risk on something that's smaller in scale.
The studios are still spooked to a certain degree. They're just not releasing a lot of these movies in theaters. They don't see evidence that there is an audience for the mid-budget and lower-budget drama movies in theaters, so they're just not putting them in, but there can't be a surprise hit if they're not in theaters.
Martin Scorsese says that today, the art of cinema is being systematically devalued, sidelined, demeaned, and reduced to its lowest common denominator: content. And I think I'd agree. It feels like now more than ever, films are held in the same playing field as something like a YouTube video or a TV show, when it just shouldn't be that way. They're all art in their own right, but they each need their own avenue to grow in. Even someone as prolific as Steven Spielberg sees the way that streaming services are treating directors and their films these days as just another piece of content. The pandemic created an opportunity for streaming platforms to raise their subscriptions to record-breaking levels and also throw some of my best filmmaker friends under the bus, as their movies were unceremoniously not given theatrical releases. They were paid off and the films were suddenly relegated to, in this case, HBO Max, the case I'm talking about. And then everything started to change. So with me throwing all this at you, it seems like the theater industry is in a pretty dire spot right now. Big directors like Scorsese and Spielberg are trying to let people know how these services are affecting theaters, but it seems like it's not doing much. But actually, things are starting to look a little bit better. With quarantine ending and people starting to get out of the house more, theaters have seen a bit of an increase in attendance recently. With films like Top Gun Maverick, Everything Everywhere All at Once, Avatar: The Way of Water, and so many others, it's really starting to look like people are more inclined to go to theaters these days.
There's optimism about the coming movie slate, and there's optimism about our patrons coming back out to cinemas. Those are the two things that we thrive on.
Now, none of this is to say that theaters are doing well. In fact, they're still doing nowhere near as well as they once were in 2018 or 2019.
The problem is, most of the projections I've seen for 2022 have the movie-going business at about 70% of normal being the 2019 numbers. That's not great if you are in the theater business. So while the studios may have hits, the aggregate for the movie business means we're not back, and the projections for next year are better, but not 100% of where we were.
Which really sucks, because as we've started to roll out of the pandemic, more and more great films are being put out that just aren't being seen by people. Some of my favorite movies that came out last year, like Babylon, Pearl, or Aftersun, either bombed at the box office or just barely made a profit, and you may not have even heard of any of them. So despite the fact that big blockbusters are bringing some people back to theaters, it's still nowhere near where we were once at, and things like AMC changing ticket prices only makes it worse. And this is all ultimately why you need to go to the theater. I completely understand if you don't have the kind of money to be able to do it very frequently, but every once in a while, just check what movies are playing at theaters near you, whether it's a chain or a local mom and pop. Your local theaters will typically be a bit cheaper in ticket prices compared to the chains because there's no random fees added on, and honestly, the experience typically feels better there. And also, don't feel like you're an awful person for using streaming services. I still use them. Like I said in the beginning, they're more convenient. It's just a matter of, are you also doing your part in going to theaters and supporting this business? Either way, just get yourself to a theater and spend 2 hours getting sucked into a film and really experience it. The feeling of being in a theater with others as a group is a tonic that you can only experience so much in your life. So come on, go to a theater. You won't regret it.